Certainly a pleasure to be here to address all of you. I'm excited to share my point of view. Now, there's no question my presentation will be based on New York. Do not look at the big city. Don't just look at the context. Don't look at the numbers because New York has a large budget. I want you to look at the principles that I've used throughout my career to make things happen. I have planned and lived in small towns, counties, large cities, small cities. I just don't want you to get confused by the bigness of New York, but the principles of what I was able to do. As Stephanie West said, I'm a planner by training. And when I heard New York City was looking for a commissioner and they said, your name keeps coming up, I said, yeah, that's not going to happen. And they called. And they said, would you consider, first they interviewed me for the planning commissioner, and I didn't get it, and I was totally happy. Loved living in North Carolina. I grew up in New York, lived there all my life, moved to North Carolina. I was head of planning for the city. And I said, no, I don't want to be Parks Commissioner. And New York City said, wait a minute, this is New York. You're saying no to us? And they asked me why. I said, because Parks is 80% operations and 20% planning. I'm a planner, and the mayor said, that's why I want you. We have to rethink our parks and public spaces in the 21st century. And so I ended up saying yes, and I went there because to me that was a challenge of bringing a very different perspective to parks and recreation. So I'm going to share with you kind of the evolution of parks and recreation and then talk about what's next. Because there's been a transformation, and anyone that's in the parks and rec world, this is our moment past COVID. When people realized the role that parks and public spaces played, when everything else was closed, our parks and public spaces remained open. And so now you're seeing more and more attention and investment in our parks and public spaces. So I will go through this, and hopefully there'll be time at the end for questions. I always like to take a step back to find out not only where we're going, but where we came from. And if you go back to the mid-19th century, mostly in Europe, parks were called parks and gardens. There were places you stroll through. You didn't stop, you didn't have a picnic, you certainly didn't play a sport. It was just nature could observe and you just move along. And that dominated Europe for the most part, and then America kind of adopted that approach, but it was parks and gardens. If I go to Europe and I go to Australia a lot, they still call it parks and gardens. These are places you observe, not really sit down and have a picnic, you move along. Then the late 19th century, early 20th century, there was this profession called landscape architecture that emerged for the first time. It was intentional that we took land, we planned it, we developed it, and created these park spaces. You're looking at Bethesda Terrace in Central Park, and Frederick Law Olmsted, when you go there, that was a man-made place. It did not exist. They shaped it for people to enjoy. Democratic, free, public spaces that all can enjoy. And that changed the face of America. Parks were being built all over the place. Prior to that, people were going to cemeteries if they wanted to have open space. It was that bad if you lived in the city. Then we get to the 1930s to 65, when Robert Moses, I'm sure you all heard of Robert Moses, I actually sat in his office as commissioner. He was commissioner for a very long period of time, but he came up with the parks and recreation era. It wasn't called recreation before. His concern was that people were literally dying in the East River because they were trying to cool off in New York's hot summer, and kids were getting killed either by a horse carriage or a car. So we started building these recreational facilities, playgrounds, pools. You're looking at one of the large pools he built, and as a result, lives were saved. Now, there were two Robert Moseses. There was pre-war, which was a really cool parks commissioner. Then it was post-war, a person who just destroyed neighborhoods and built these highways. But the pre-war was a great person, and that was a parks and rec era, and that's where that term recreation, which your program has as well, started. Then we get to the late 20th century. The next movement is the environmental movement. You may not know this, and maybe you're too young, but the Industrial Revolution or the industrial cities started to collapse at the end of the late 20th century. Pittsburgh, Chattanooga, all those places were just losing these businesses, and we had all this industrial land, usually near the waterfront or railroads, that now people were saying we have to rediscover it, we have to heal it, and we have to bring it back for the public to enjoy. You're looking at Riverside Park. That was a shipping yard on the west side of Manhattan. Now this is an amazing park where people can now enjoy the water. Now the water's cleaner, the land's been cleaned up, and so that was a movement that occurred in the late 20th century. But who knew a railroad on the west side of Manhattan could now become one of the coolest 1.5-mile parks on the planet? That's the High Line. Once again, a rail yard or a railroad that was converted and giving back to the public to enjoy. And it's the transformation of many cities, waterfront parks, industrial parks that now are changed for people to enjoy. It continues. And I grew up near Brooklyn Bridge Park. I cannot believe I can now kayak in a park that was a shipping yard, and now this is a great amenity that the public can enjoy. This is happening all over the country. Places are being changed because of their parks and public spaces, and that's going to continue. And what's more important is that I have used this slide many times over the years. I believe we as professionals need to watch emerging trends like a stockbroker watches a market. Things change. Everything I share with you from the late 19th century until today, things change. And they'll continue to change. We're now having emerging sports, putting pickleball aside, which we knew about years ago. But now, when I was in New York City, cricket, rugby, lacrosse, we watch these South American volleyball. We watch these new sports to make sure we provide recreation for those from different countries that now they find it more appealing. And so that's something that we also have to watch to make sure we're responding to the demographics of our time. But today, the challenges that we're facing in parks with climate change, extreme weather events, droughts, flooding, wildfires, the public health crisis, racial and social justice, divisive politics, and now the post-COVID behavior. What's next? Now, before I get into that, I wanted to share with you the system that I was in charge of. As Stephanie said, it was a 30,000-acre park system. That included 10,000 in just natural areas. I had about 7,000 full-time employees, and we went up to 10,000 in the summertime for beaches, pools, and camps. So basically, it was an army. I remember when they interviewed me, they said, "Have you ever, managed a staff of 10,000?" I said, "Who has?" I mean, really, that's a lot of people. But community gardens, tennis courts, golf courses, ice skating rinks, this was a huge portfolio. And it was so central to New York that if you see my annual budget to operate the department, it was $600 million, and my capital budget was $4 billion for a five-year capital plan. That's how much New York City wanted to make sure they had a great park system, but they put their money where their mouth is, and I got to oversee this amazing portfolio. So as those of you in the room, it's not just about parks, sports, and recreation. You can see we got to oversee athletic fields, basketball courts, golf courses, ice skating rinks, pools, rec centers, 14 miles of beaches, all under my jurisdiction. And I love the job, and I wish I can go back to New York, but you're assigned, your term is over, and then you have to move on. So the really big question is, so what's next? You saw where we were, 19th century, 20th century, and now the 21st century. What's next? And so from my perspective, I want to share with you there are a couple of things. Number one, parks serve many roles. They're centered on people. They're outdoor gathering places. Depending on how dense your city is, they are outdoor living rooms, your front yard, your backyard, because not everyone has a 40-acre piece of property. There are some people that just do not have land, and they need those outdoor spaces centered on people. It's not just an amenity, but it's now an essential part of the city's infrastructure. We're now using parks for stormwater capture, for clean air by planting more trees. They're now serving multiple purposes than just this green space that sits there in isolation. It's the first line of defense against climate change. When I was in New York's a coastal city. 155 miles of our parks were against the river. And so we rebuilt our parks to protect people and property, so parks started serving multiple purposes. And it's not just for physical health, but it's also for mental well-being. And COVID really showed that to us, and then their economic drivers. So when I was there, I always want to set an image of what we do. When I was Parks Commissioner, I felt we weren't just a Department of Parks and Recreation, but we were the Department of Fun, Health, and Happiness. And I had to communicate that to staff. Every city, every town, every county should have a Department of Fun. You're not the fire department, you're not the police department. And so I had to communicate that our role is so different, that we provide that health, that joy, that happiness. And so I had to talk to staff to show them how we have to live that brand than just recreation and parks. And so at all of our public meetings, we invited the young people. You can see how excited he was. He finally got that tree house that he was asking for in that local park. We kind of said we would do it, but we couldn't do it. To really show the happiness, the joy about how we do our work. When I met with my staff, we led with what I called a culture of care. It wasn't just about maintenance, but it was about care. Care for our parks, care for our volunteers, care for our employees. And I differentiate maintenance and care, which I'll get to in a second. But to me, it was important that if we're really a Department of Fun, Health, and Happiness, we have to live that in what we do every single day. It's not just a job. For us, it was a mission. And I love it when the public left these love notes to us. And I told my staff, please do not paint this bench over. This is a love letter to us, showing how much people love and cherish their park spaces. So all of that comes into play. So we talk about what's next. It's really about equity, access, and inclusion, planning and placemaking, resiliency. What I'm going to talk about is in red. I will not talk about what is in gray. But I do want to talk about caring for parks, maintenance versus caring. When I came in, I said, you know something? Maintenance is important. It's a checklist. But I want you to understand what caring means. I have a 24-year-old daughter. When I raised her, I didn't maintain her. I cared for her and nurtured her. Maintenance is a checklist, but caring comes from a different part of the soul. And I wanted the entire department to understand that we're going to do maintenance, but also caring. Because we have volunteers come to our parks on weekends to volunteer their time, not to maintain, because they care. And I don't want you to forget that, because most people don't understand the importance of caring. When I left as commissioner, the number one thing staff told me is, we're going to miss you because you cared and you showed it. And they did a much better job at what they were doing. Now I'm going to quickly go over these words. I've been in this space for about 30 years. Now is the hot topic. Everyone has a DEI statement. But since I've been doing it for 30 years, I'm going to break it down. Because a lot of people misunderstand it. I have working definitions. I don't even use the word equity anymore. I try to use something else. So here is my working definition. Please take a photograph, because this is something, as I travel, I want to explain exactly what these words mean. People jumble it up. DEI, oh, let's take one at a time. Diversity, the value of different perspectives. It's not black-white. It's age. It's political affiliation. It's gender. It's ability or disability. Diversity is the value of different perspectives. And when you have a staff, when you reach out to the community, you want to hear those different perspectives and not just engage those who show up at the meeting. Diversity is the value of different perspectives on your team, in your classroom, when you go out to the workforce, the value of different perspectives. Equity, simple word, fairness. That community got a new park, I didn't. They got a brand new basketball court, I didn't. That's not fair. That's what equity is. The minute someone says that's not fair, that's what equity means. So I want to demystify that word, so when you'll see in a second how we address it in New York City, it's about fairness or unfairness. That's what equity means. Inclusion must be welcoming to all, and then access is removing barriers. So when I talk about what we're able to do in New York City, because I had that lens, we were able to approach these challenges very differently. But diversity, equity, inclusion, and access, it's not something you do, it's who you are. That's why so many organizations that have the DEI statements, it's empty. It's just words. They delegate an officer, they delegate an office. It is who you are. If I said, hey, let's have a campaign on kindness, I mean, that's crazy. Either you're kind or you're not kind. Because if you go in a community saying we embrace diversity, equity, inclusion, they'll see right through you because they know it's fake. It's just a statement. It is who you are. And because of it, it was who I am, I was able to look at a problem, the same thing you were looking at, but saw something totally different, and you'll see some examples. So let's first start with fairness. Because when the mayor brought me on, he says our system is unfair, there are underserved communities that are not getting a quality park, and so we had to first define a word for the mayor, and I said we have to make sure people understand it's about fairness. What is fair, what is not fair? To me, that is something important. So within 6 months, we came up with this plan, a framework for an equitable future or fair future, and we rolled it out to a lot of success. But we had to understand, were we being fair or not fair? So we had to look at how much New York City spent, and you could do this wherever you work, how much New York City spent over 20 years, and it turned out it was $6 billion over 20 years to improve parks. $6 billion. We increased more acreage and came up with this walk score that they wanted almost every New Yorker to be within a walk to a park. That's a metric from Trust for Public Land. Great, one problem. Be careful when you rely on metrics, because to me, it wasn't about proximity, it was about quality. Because I can walk to one of those parks within that walking distance, and I will let my child or grandchild step foot in that space. But it met the walk score, you can walk to it, well, you'll see in a second whether it's worth the walk. So we had to figure out, without polling anyone, without speaking to elected officials, how many parks in New York City received little to no investment over 20 years. $6 billion spent, who got left out? And it turned out with 215 parks. 215 parks over 20 years. They're watching all these other neighborhoods get these new sports fields and community centers and pools. They got nothing. And so the mayor and I said, that's not fair, and we had to change it. That's what fairness means. And when I now as a consultant, a lot of clients don't want to know this, but we have to do an analysis and say, hey, you have 80 parks, you've ignored 20 parks for 20 years. That's not fair. That's not fair. So we came up with this Community Parks Initiative. We couldn't do all 215 at the time, so we selected 67. Before I left as commissioner, the mayor added another 100, so we're getting closer to the 215. And we decided to change it from the ground up. So here's one of those parks. Isn't it cool? Wouldn't you want to go there tomorrow, hang out with your friends, roll on the asphalt? This was that park that you can walk to within 10 minutes. A typical Robert Moses, asphalt field, high fence, and you can't find one blade of grass. So my question is, that's what we grew up with, that's what I grew up with. Yet, that was a walk to a park. Is that a park or a parking lot? Now, the next one's a little bit better because there's a bench and some trees, so I propose you can go there, hang out with your friends, maybe propose when you're ready. Once again, that was the park within a 10-minute walk. Then we said, yeah, it's on the metric. Wrong. That's wrong. So, it's a little delayed. There we go. So we decided not only we're going to do these parks, we're going to employ this Parks Plus approach. We're going to be more intentional, not just to put replacement in kind, which is there's a play unit, replace it. There's a basketball, replace it. No, we went extra. And we wanted to create not just a park, but a place to bring the entire community together since we're redoing it over from scratch. So we decided to focus on multi-generational spaces. You have water play for kids, you have adult fitness equipment for those that are older. We wanted to use very vibrant colors, get away from the gray asphalt to make it pop so people could be proud. It could be a gathering place where people can enjoy. People wanted to get rid of the asphalt and wanted more greenery. And so you all know, just being in green space for 20 minutes reduces stress and reduces anxiety. As I said earlier, parks serve multiple purposes. It also captures stormwater. So it's doing extra work as well by just being a green space. Not just green spaces, but they also do extra work. And then we quadrupled the amount of seating. When other cities were taking chairs and benches away because they were afraid of the unhoused and homeless, we were adding more because these were people places, particularly for seniors that love to sit and watch life, and we want them to age gracefully, so we quadrupled the amount of seating in all of our parks. We want them to be gathering places that people can go. And so that was a thought going forward. So I'm going to share with you one of the parks that was transformed. This is in the South Bronx. It's right next to community college. Now, the other ones I showed you were all asphalt with no vegetation. You'll see in a second, this one had a very foreboding entrance. It's not a space I go into. The community college is across the street. And while the other ones had asphalt, this one had vegetation. Unfortunately, it looked like this. Now, I want you to think for a second, as commissioner, I was embarrassed and quite angry that this was a space that we thought was acceptable for a young family and kids to play in. So when I told you that I didn't want my child or grandchild to step foot in a park, this is the one I was talking about. I mean, just look at that. Look at how bad that is. Go play. To me, we knew something had to change. The good news, it was New York Community College. I told you it had to be multi-generational, had to be Parks Plus. There's ping pong tables, there's spray features, there's tables for seniors. They're now all at grade, so if you have a stroller or a walker, you can now access this space. Because it's near community college, we had a central gathering place where the students can go to and hang out and connect and learn, and there's community college in the back. And it opened up during COVID, and there's the finished product. Synthetic turf, so it could be multi-purpose. And the students even know this space existed because it had a high fence with all this vegetation blocking it. Changing lives. The next one to show you is one that is very personal to me. There was another asphalt playground in Brooklyn we converted. We put a track, synthetic turf, all this wonderful play equipment. And on opening day, which for us is a big celebration, this little boy, Hispanic, about 8 years old, would not go into that park. Now, for us, it is a fun day. It's like a party, but he would not come into the park. And I asked one of my employees to go speak to this little boy, saying, "Why won't you come in?" And his response was, he didn't come in because he thought he had to pay. Nothing in that neighborhood existed like that. He thought that for some reason that was not a free place. He had to pay. Nothing like that existed. And there's the park, and there's a little boy running around the track. His life was changed. Not just that, every child in that neighborhood changed. And so you know, this initiative, where we did it in these neighborhoods, crime went down. Because when you respect the community with quality material and a quality park, they respect you back in return. You have that other space with weeds, what you're saying is, I don't care. I don't care about you. But we cared. And now children in that neighborhood are thriving and connecting and staying healthy because now they have a small synthetic turf, a track, on the other side they have all the play equipment to get all their exercise. Just because someone with a different lens wanted to see fairness and unfairness. So it doesn't have to be New York, it could be wherever you live, that you can have that same lens as well. So before I left, we were able to transform 62 of 67. 82% of the parks, we created a friends group. These are now neighbors that become stewards to care for the park, zero vandalism, and lower crime. And the usership increased by 50%. More people now connecting and enjoying their public space. So I'll skip through this very quickly, but it's very important that in planning circles we call placemaking, and that's creating an experience of a place. It's very important to have it people-centered. I'll kind of skip through these, but to me, I believe that people eat and sleep in their homes and apartments, but they live in the public realm. That's where you have all your fun, in the public realm. And so for us, we wanted to take a look at this public realm. Older generations were consumers of goods. We love buying things. Your generation, you're consumers of experiences. There are some people, like you, will move to a city without having a job because you enjoy the experience, and you go back there again and again. So I believe that we should not just be planners and designers, but if you're in the hospitality business, sports and rec, you also have to be experience builders. It's the experience you build for people that are going to use your sports fields, your parks, your public spaces, and it's different depending on the demographics, the age. You have to be focused on building that experience, and that's something we do all the time. What is the experience, and who is it for? So just a quick plug for my firm, and now with a company. And I was happy when I got there. It says, our tagline is creating experiences through experience. I said, okay, I'm in the right place. And so we spent our time creating these unique experiences for places, both big cities, small city, towns, rural areas. So now it's a delight that I can carry that mission of creating experiences now through the private sector. So let's talk about access. So, now, you're looking at a place in New York City, because a lot of places I go to say, well, we don't have any land to purchase or create a park. Well, in New York City, we took underperforming concrete and asphalt and made it a space. We just reimagined it. You're now looking at Flatiron Building, Flatiron District, and that was a traffic island. And we figured out, you know something, let's give it back to the public. Let's create this space and experience. Tables, chairs, some flower pots, and voila, create experience. Very, very popular location. In fact, there it is from an aerial view. And so we took a hard look at any city we go to. Parks represent New York City 14% of the public realm, streets and sidewalks 26%. Put that together, 40% of New York City was public. yet we gave it all away to cars. Now they're taking it back. Madrid, Barcelona, Paris, London, New York. They're taking the concrete back, reimagining it so that people now have access to public space. And when someone tells me, we don't have money to buy land to create a park, I said, do you have street? Yeah, well then you have a park. Do you have a sidewalk? Yeah, then you have a park. You just have to reimagine it. You own it, just reimagine what you're doing. Something new again, we did in New York City. So here's one example. I love what Umstead said, the sidewalk adjacent to the park should be considered the outer park. Now hopefully where you come from, they don't do this, but New York City is gate happy, fence happy. We put a fence around every public space. You probably see a little dog down the block, just wants to sniff some grass, but he can't get in. He got to walk another 5 minutes to go into that park. But we also looked at that sidewalk and said from now on, that's going to be considered the outer park, because sidewalks next to parks in New York City is under the jurisdiction of the Parks Department. So we went to town, changing the sidewalk, looking at the fence, because we really wanted access, we wanted people to enjoy the public space. This is one slide I never understood. I have a feeling the Parks Department thought the trees were going to run away at night, so they put a fence around it, make sure the trees don't run away. Didn't happen, trees don't run away. And when I said we're going to take down or lower the fence, people said, wait a minute, you're going to make the park less safe. Really? Do you see what's happening halfway down the block? You can't, because the gate, which is supposed to keep you safe, eliminates the sight line. So we were able to convince them that actually fences, spiked fences, 7 feet, were making the public less safe. That gave birth to a program called Parks Without Borders. This was part of our One NYC program. It was a pilot because people were nervous whether it would work, because I wanted to take down fences, cut down fences, increase entry. So we did it as a pilot. Now it's successful. It's now part of the Parks Department philosophy for all their parks. And those communities that said, don't you dare take down the fence, now they're saying, why don't you take down our fence? So you can see the change in evolution by some of those pilot projects. So the program was simple. We looked at the edges, the entrances, and adjacent park spaces. It was all real estate we owned. And we reimagined what we can do with these spaces. For entrances, we looked carefully at the fence, whether we could eliminate it or take it down altogether, because we wanted people to have that visual access to the public spaces. Now, for sports, for water, for dog runs, for little kids, we did have perimeter fences, but they were right sized to make sure it was safe. But generally, you don't need a fence for a passive park where kids are not playing. And so we want to make sure it was a lot easier to go into. In terms of women and seniors, please take note of this. Number one, women want to have a sense of safety. They want to see over the fence. Do you know the number 2 thing women hate in public spaces? Men without shirts. Biggest complaint. I know, surprise to all of you, because I know if you're buff, you want to take off the shirt. Number 1 complaint, they look at the equation of male to female, it's men without shirts. But in this particular case, lower the fence, you can now see inside. The police loved it. They can now surveil it better versus having this tall fence. And we put benches on the sidewalk because, we'll try another one. Because, it's back again. It's the outer park. Parks close, sidewalks never close. And this is a way, whether you have a stroller, you're a senior, you want to sit and rest, you can. Revolutionize New York City parks. So I'm going to give you an example of one of these parks in Queens. This is Travis Park. So we were able to take a park, a street, and a playground and merge them all together to create one space. Before that, they were on different jurisdictions. Now we made it one common space. Once again, there's someone walking with a dog, tall fence, dog's not even interacting, smelling grass. I want you to take note of where those trees are located. We took the entire experience of the park, took down the fence, and brought it out to the street. Where those trees were sitting by themselves, now they're in a planting bed that adds energy to the street. I talked about how parks are outdoor living rooms. We made sure that they're now facing one another. Most parks I go to have bench, bench, bench. So it's like, hey, how you doing? I'm okay. No, I want to be like a living room. We actually could have a conversation. And so we put them perpendicular to one another, took down the fence, and now brought the entire park experience out to the street. That street that was demapped, that's no longer used. This is when before And then after, now this is a space connecting the schoolyard and the park. Now it's used for festivals and events, all sorts of things. That's the entry and the edge. And then here's the finished product. Just reimagining park space differently. Now they want to create the whole street into a park. So the park is closed, but the sidewalk isn't. And you see people out there on a hot night engaging, young, old. The park is fulfilling its purpose, that social gathering place, just by reimagining the public realm. If not, there would have been that one tall fence with Belgian block, not engaging. That one idea had transformed our parks. I'm sorry, if someone want to take a picture, you can. There you go. All right. So we went further and started to reclaim streets. New York City took 8,000 parking spaces during COVID and gave them to the outdoor sheds for dining, creating this wonderful outdoor experience. I don't know if you've done that here in Harrisonburg or in Charlottesville, but now this is part of New York City's landscape. It kind of softens it up, and we told cars, you know something? The public realm's not just for you, it's for people. And so now open streets, shared streets, play streets is a great way of creating active space without creating a park, but this now is becoming very popular. One's in Boston, the other two are in New York. I used to live right there near Dumbo, cool space. So let's talk about inclusion. Now, when I say inclusion, it's to really plan for all people, make sure everyone's included, because we can design exclusive spaces, particularly when there's a sport that has fees. Golf and others tend to be exclusive sports because there's an entry to get in. But to me, the telltale sign of inclusion is that it creates a sense of belonging, and you can say two things. I feel welcome here, I belong here. And that's something I do every time I walk into a space. Do I feel welcome here? Do I belong here? My radars are always up. And that's something we truly want to include all, because parks are for all. But it's interesting, are parks really for all? I cannot believe it, I couldn't believe it when I went to New York City and they literally had a sign in a New York City public park that said you couldn't loiter. Now, I understand for private property, I get it. But for public space, the word loitering means to stand or wait idly by without an apparent purpose. Guess what? That's what you do in a park. But if you're a certain demographic, that rule could be racialized and you could be pushed out of a park or called 911. And so luckily in 2017, we went to the city council and the word loitering was removed as a park rule, as part of the Criminal Justice Reform Act, because young people were getting ticketed and arrested by literally sitting in a park. That to me is having that lens of seeing what that is. But we went a step further. During COVID, we actually came up with the Yes Loitering Project to find out how teens might be excluded from or targeted in public space. The two most targeted people in public space are teens and the unhoused. But the challenge is parks are for all. Are teenagers part of all? And the answer is yes. So this project was very instrumental. Our goal was how to create more youth-powered spaces because we want our teenagers, our young people, to enjoy public spaces versus saying, no loitering, you're not welcome here. That was a wrong message to send. Here's another weird one in New York City. Hopefully you don't have this, but you could not go into the park as an adult unless you were accompanied by a child, which really made me angry. I want to have this little stand, where you could rent a child to go into the park. Just as an adult, you can go in there and enjoy a public space. Crazy rule. We changed it, we got rid of it, and this was an issue where 500 of our parks, if you were an adult, you could not go in unless you had a child. That was not fair, it was wrong, and we changed it. So I'm going to talk about some reflections about some of the social justice issues, and then I'll end with some examples of some of our park transformations. But this is one where I have to tell you, during the protest, during COVID, they all came at a head, managing a large agency, a father, dealing with all the protests in parks. It was probably the most troubling period of my life. Very, very disruptive, where I had to come up with some very personal issues. We were dealing with COVID, Parks Department remained open. We had to service hundreds and thousands of New Yorkers. We had to stay open, and I had to continue going to work. As I stated with you, I was going through some tough stuff. Now people are looking at this issue even more, And we had to take a class, because I was a broken person, I'll be honest with you, a broken person. And we reached out to the Department of Mental Health, and they shared something with me that changed my life and changed our employees and staff. The person who gave the class talked about how stress is good. You're students, you have a paper, you need that adrenaline flowing to get done, but long-term stress leads to anxiety, and long-term anxiety leads to trauma. And that's where people are going through. The 2 years of isolation and COVID was creating trauma for a lot of people. I started thinking that was 2 years. What about communities that have been dealing with generational trauma? And so we looked at some of the examples, and it's not just, it was emotional, behavioral, cognitive, spiritual, and some of the things, smoking or drinking, trouble sleeping, fear, social withdrawal, trouble concentrating, memory problems, and go on and on and on. I realized that I was going through these things. Then I realized the residents of New Yorkers were going through this. My employees were going through this. Some of you were going through this. And so for us, it was a reckoning that knowing this is what's going on, what could we in a department do? Fun, health, happy. This was more serious. Little did I know there was something called the Stewardship Institute. And we took this other class, Stewardship Trauma Institute, and they said, here is a survival guide to get through it. Go outside, admire art, spend time with animals. We actually brought baby kittens and puppies into the office for people to pet. It was amazing. That we had to figure out what role can we play rather than sitting there and doing our normal operations. No, fun, health, and happy. We were different. We're parks. We had to figure out what to do. And so we were very intentional about how we can help New Yorkers, because we recognized during COVID that parks and greenways became our sanctuaries of sanity, and that they have the power to heal and bring joy. And we lean into that. Just like in 1918 pandemic, when 50 million people died, parks grew exponentially during that period. We knew it was our moment, our time, and we had to be very intentional. The work that you're going into can save lives. Healing and joy. That's the business that you're going into. And if that's not what you're into and it's just the active of sport, you have to be mission driven about this. People's lives will be changed, and COVID was a test. And those of you that are into sports, we had to close our sports fields. Close them, because people could not socially distance, and so we had to make sure that our parks really should now be considered part of our healthcare system, because they are. In fact, there are doctors that will give you a prescription to take a walk in the park. Don't take a mental health day, just take a walk in a park. So we started to become very creative to kind of help someone out. You couldn't hug someone during COVID, so we put up 2,000 of these signs all over New York City so that people can somehow smile and feel light about it and give a tree a hug. In fact, the thing went viral. There's LeVar Burton. There were people all over the city on Instagram, and they really got into it. I mean, we wanted to figure out how, in our role, we could not stop COVID, but we wanted to provide that extra help for people as they were going through it. I think it went out. Oh, it's back again. The other part for me personally, each of you have dealt with this very differently. After the death of George Floyd and witnessing a man being murdered live on television, calling to his mother as he was going to meet her, was a little bit too much for me. And I was just overwhelmed and broken, and it was a point of reflection for me. A lot of my friends and allies kept saying, what can I do? What can I do? And look, they're good friends, and I said, don't ask me what you can do. That's the wrong question. The first question you should ask me is, how do I feel? You get to the do later. Ask me how I feel, because what I just witnessed was far too traumatizing. Don't ask me what can I do, because if you ask me what can I do, it's about you. If you ask me how do I feel, it's about me. And so we had a conversation with our staff called Reflections to ask them how they felt. Those conversations were powerful. Through those conversations, staff finally said, we want to do something. There's something we want to do. We found a park in Brooklyn. This was before Juneteenth became a national holiday, but it had to be special. Back there, where you see that wall, is where the protest for George Floyd took place. So we looked, and there were actually 19 benches, and we planted 19 trees and named it Juneteenth Grove and painted it the Pan-African colors. I cannot begin to tell you, when this officially came to be Juneteenth as a holiday, this park was packed with so much joy. This was a space for healing, for joy, for protest, for coming together, and it worked. I get very emotional because sometimes I go by there, I didn't live that far away, and to see how people felt they belonged, it was special, simple. A sign, a naming, but our staff, because of those reflection calls, we felt we had to be part of the effort to paint the benches, and I had the privilege of praying for the tree that I planted. There were 19 rosebud trees that are there to show connection to the sky, both the past and the present and the future, and it was our privilege to create this very special place as a way of creating a space of belonging where all would feel welcome. So I'm going to stop now and just share with you some of the transformations before and after that we were able to accomplish. And as I stated, because this program was so successful, the mayor, before he left and I stepped down as commissioner, authorized another $400 million to do another 100 parks like this. It has been that impactful to the city of New York. That one's in favor, that one of the transformations, but I don't have a before and after. So our Playground Plus focused on being inclusive, equitable, sustainable, all different ages. We just wanted to make sure that we were intentional, that we weren't just doing a replacement in kind, we wanted to be transformative. This is a horrible, horrible park. A lot of bad things happen, a lot of crime. This is in Brooklyn. This was Lincoln Terrace Playground. In fact, right before we did it, there was a murder there. I mean, this was not a pleasant place. But we were determined to transform this space for the community that deserved it, regardless of how scary the neighborhood was. And we transformed it. This is what it looked like today, filled with people. I know people who used to live around here and saying they wish they hadn't moved, because this is one amazing space now that people can truly enjoy. Again, there's water gardens, a lot of places to sit, everything I shared with you. It was very intentional, social gathering places, a lot of room to do things. We experimented with these really cool new play features that kids love. They can climb over it, through it, always benches around it so someone can watch their kids play. This one is in the Bronx. This is Sawmill Playground. This is your typical asphalt playground. Just drop a play unit in the middle. Most places in the South do this, but it's grass or wood chips. In this case, New York is asphalt. Another sad space in the Bronx, high fence, asphalt, nothing to do there. But it meets the walk score, so I guess people are happy. So here's our concept design, multi-generational, Playground Plus. Make sure all the features are there. Very nice space. Once again, a rain garden, benches, use very bright safety surface to brighten up the space, make it more inviting. We were able to squeeze in, once again, a small track, synthetic turf, a multi-play, wall ball, benches once again. I want to see how we were very intentional. It wasn't by accident that we wanted to really create these special places for people who have been deprived for over 20 years. This is Luther Gulick. If you don't know, he was the godfather, grandfather of basketball. This was named after him in the Lower East Side. A lot of basketball courts and handball walls, but a pathetic space. I mean, who wants to go there? This was another one we're able to really transform. The community is overwhelmed. What's nice is between two different demographic groups, and they all come together in this space. One is primarily white, then is Latino and Asian. They all come together in this space. It's a beautiful sight to see. This is what it looks like on the ground level. There's the ping pong tables. And then that was a tree I was gonna cut down, but the community convinced me to keep it. And now it's right near this nice kind of crushed stone seating area, which is very intimate to them. This is a park, I don't know what those red things are. Sometimes designers go away, come back with these crazy designs, but this was another sad space. This one was one of our most proudest transformations. Once again, not appealing play equipment, and now we create this amazing space. Once again, you see the place where the fences are located. We took them down. We now have that nice area where if the park's closed, you could still stay there. A stunning, stunning transformation from what was there. This playground was built for all abilities, all ages. Here's another example. Alameda, 6-foot spike fence, don't know why. Another sad space. And then this one, I wanted to take down a handball wall. My staff said no, came up with this amazing concept, which I hadn't seen done before. That's a design, and they took tiles to create a mosaic on the handball wall, which now became a backdrop for the water feature. The community is just blown away. The space is now bigger, more enjoyable, beautiful. Since we took down the fence, you guys can see it. This is now the most popular park in that neighborhood. Once again, lots of seating for people to enjoy, because we want people to come and loiter and enjoy our parks. So, and then once again, we also do the outer park, the sidewalk, lower fence. You can now see it compared to the earlier image. This community was deprived for 20 years. Now they have a quality park they can connect and they can enjoy. So our goal, and I hope your goal in your profession, is to create an equitable, inclusive, and resilient park and public space system that is accessible to all and has the power to heal and bring joy to both present but also future generations. Thank you all very much.
I think you can hear me. While you're thinking of questions, I would like to just point out a few great things I've been teaching about former Commissioner Silver's presentation. I've been talking to my seniors about presentation skills and trying to harness those skills. And so some of the things that I wrote down while he was speaking was that he has a passion for parks. He has a passion for people. He has a passion for diversity, equity, inclusion, and access. I think we can all agree we felt that, right? And so I also want to point out how he used research. He used research, he collected quantitative data, so numbers, to look at where had money been spent on those parks, so that he could say definitively, this is where we should invest. So those decisions weren't based on anecdotes, they weren't based on squeaky wheels, they were based on what he knew to be true, so that he could move the needle. And then the last thing, of course, I have to log in first, is that he used research in another way. He supported his ideas with research, and so he didn't just do his own research. He knows what research is going on in our field. And so he mentioned that 20 minutes in nature reduces stress, reduces anxiety, improves mental health. I know that too, but do you know that? And what research are you going to know when you leave school that you have to always be studying? So for those of you that are looking forward to graduation, some of you are seniors and thinking, like, I'll be done with books. I hope you're never done with books. I hope you're never done with learning more. We learn more about what we don't know, and that's important too. So, we weren't having discussions about a lot of the same issues we're having discussions about 20 or 30 years ago. And some of New York City's parks, like along Brooklyn's edge, is very different now from 20 years ago because the hurricanes came and flooded that area. And if they want to save those millions and millions and millions of dollars of buildings, they need parks. They need us. And I love that. I want everyone to need us. So, now that I'm done talking, what questions do you have for Mr. Silver? I know it's a packed room, it's nervous. Tough to ask questions. I'll help you. In the front row, I love it.
Thank you for coming to speak with us. So when you were thinking of this project for New York City, were you scared of anything per se while going into it? And if you were, how did you get over that?
The only thing I was concerned about was the Parks Without Borders. I grew up in New York in the 80s and 90s. People just felt to secure yourself, you put up a fence. And so coming back and living in North Carolina and traveling, New York was one of those few cities that had a fence. So I wanted to figure out what's up with that. And so we did it as a pilot. I traveled the city meeting with each borough leadership to say, this is what I'm going to do. But a pilot's an easy way of experimenting to see if it works. And if it doesn't work, I'm not doing it again. If it works, then you continue. So I was nervous because there was a lot of pushback, particularly from older residents that kept saying, what do you mean take down the fence? Because I remember what happened in the University of Pennsylvania. They had this issue between the community and the campus, and the president at the time decided to take down the fences surrounding the campus, and guess what happened? The campus got safer. And people were like, wait. Take down the fence got safer because the community said, by putting up a fence, you're doing like this to me. By opening up saying you're now welcome, and an improved community collaboration and relationships. So yes, I was concerned initially about Parks Without Borders. We rolled it out as a pilot. It was very successful, and you can see from Traverse Park, the public loved it as well. So the answer is yes. You do have to have some courage. You need to do your homework, have your talking points, and use a pilot versus rolling out millions of dollars for a program you're not sure is going to work. Yes?
How long did refurbishing these parks take, and how did the construction sites affect the community?
The question is, how long did construction take, and how did the construction affect the communities? Before I got there, it was 5 to 6 years. Another thing I'm proud of, we got it down to 3 to 4 years. So we're able to do it quicker. We streamlined the capital process. I won't bore you with the details. In terms of construction site, it's limited to perimeter of the park. On average, it was closed between 12 to 18 months, depending on how big the park was. But once it opened up, the public was very excited. Other questions? Yes?
Thank you for coming. My name is Kevin McTierney. As going off that, like when you're looking to design a park, do you have a community impact, and then like how do you know like what you're going to include in each space?
The question is, how do we know when we do a park how to include? Do you remember a little boy with his hands up like that? We have community workshops for every park project. I was able to complete 850 capital projects during my tenure, and every single one had a community meeting. The community helped us program the space. We first asked what percentage active, what percentage passive, and then we gave them choices. There's a basketball court 2 blocks down. Do you really want one here? Or you could do something else. And so they helped us make those decisions, and as a result, their participation, young and old, we were able to design a park that was inclusive for everyone, for all abilities. So for us, that was critically important. So thank you for that question. Yes?
So obviously, you improved these parks with like recreation and play and stuff, but the famous parks like Rucker and Dickman, have you guys ever considered improving those that hold events?
Questions about Rutgers, and the other one is? I'm not sure about, in terms of Rutgers, they have a whole culture around it. We kind of let them tell us what they want, and we just give it to them. Because if you don't know West 4th, basketball court as well, we'll do a creative court, which is when you paint the safety surface, which we'll do. But there are some parks that have such a following, particularly iconic basketball courts, that I'm not going to go in and mess up the vibe. Like, for example, we talked about teens. We have some skate parks underneath bridges. We said, graffiti, you want to do graffiti? Go ahead and do it. We don't care. We're not going to erase it. We're not going to paint it over. That's their space. That's how you're going to customize it. It freaks out people. But those are graffiti zones, and if you want to customize it, usually only under a bridge, which nobody can see, they can do it. So we leave basketball courts alone, like Rutgers and West 4th, where these places are famous, and some of the skate parks underneath bridges, we just leave it alone. Because we tried painting, I told my staff, just let it go. You're out there every week painting the graffiti, and it's back again. Just let it go.
Will, you had a question in the back, I think?
Have you ever dealt with any pushback from any communities who might feel like they're still not receiving that same level of fairness? And if so,
Not in New York. I'm now in Raleigh, North Carolina. I just served as co-chair of the Parks Bond. I heard that there. But in New York, you do hear it from some extent, but they know that this program exists, and every council member is fighting for their park to get picked. Because it's data-driven, I have criteria. We do our research, so it's not just me picking arbitrarily. There's a rationale, and they know their time will come. As I stated, we did 850 park projects, 67 were through the Community Parks Initiative, so I'd have to say we touched a lot of parks in New York City, so they are now more patient to wait their turn. They know the renovation's coming. So I really get a lot of pushback, just hurry up, get it done quicker, please. That's about it. So how many is in the sports side? Oh my God. The recreation side. Wait, 3, 4, 5. Oh, now I get it. You're sports people. Ah. Well, I hope you understand what I share with you. There is no bigger issue right now in the sports world, and I'll just say the DEIA is huge. Any organization looking for leadership, they're going to ask you, tell me your approach, and don't just give them something that sounds good. It is now something that's being practiced in the sports world heavily. Because you want to make sure, like for example, I was just sharing with Professor West, I was in Australia. Their approach to sport is very different than here. They don't have NCAA. There's no collegiate sports. Everything's through the crew and the clubs from the time they're young to older, and now they're having a diversity problem because now you have to have access or a scholarship to go into the clubs and the crews. That's their professional sport. It's not what we have here, where you have high school. They have sports like that, but everything, if you really want to be a sports player, you have to go through the leagues and the clubs, whether it's footy or lacrosse, or they have their different rugby. Everything comes through the leagues and the sports. But even over there, they're getting more sensitive to issues of diversity. New Zealand got it. They really understand embracing the Polynesian culture to make sure it's ingrained. So pay attention to what I share with you, because as you move out there into the profession, it is more heavily part of the equation and conversation about sports. No questions about sport? I'll take sport question too. Synthetic turf, what are the trends? The coolest thing I saw in New Zealand is now they're replacing crumb rubber with sand. They're experimenting with sand and synthetic turf with a very different surface, so that's pretty cool. And in New York City, I created a special turf management team because our staff did a very bad job managing synthetic turf. Life cycle, about 8 years. If you maintain it, and go to 12 years, 15 years. And so we had a team, 180 synthetic turf fields in New York City. Now we had a specialized team. The guy used to work for the Jets and other Meadowlands, and so he knew how to take care of it. The coolest guy ever. I didn't even know that Penn State had a whole a whole degree on turf management. You're shaking your head. Isn't that right? I was like, are you serious? But he got it, and I hired him. Yes?
You mentioned the sand in New Zealand. Is there any other differences that you've noticed between like U.S. parks and European parks?
Is there a difference between U.S. parks and European parks? Yes. A lot more active recreation in American parks. Many European parks are still perceived as parks and gardens. In fact, I got a lot of trouble when I went to Melbourne, Australia, when they asked for my advice, because I didn't see anywhere to sit, and it was just parks and gardens. And I said, you need to have more activities. And the headline said, Parks Chief said, make our parks amusement theme parks. I didn't say that, but that's how they interpreted it. The biggest change is, yes, you have these formal parks and gardens, and they're more for observation, like a botanic garden, where New York, the United States, very heavily sports. The other big difference, rural areas, greenways and sport fields, suburban areas, urban areas tend to have more playgrounds and more exciting playgrounds, parks, but there's a big difference between the two. Parks and gardens, full, active, passive, cool parks with sports fields. Big difference, yes.
So like, putting down turf is really expensive. Did you see it like more cost effective in the long run to do turf?
Well, the question is, synthetic turf is very expensive. It is. That's why we hired our team to at least extend its life. The problem is, you all know, certain sports, once they compact the soil, that field is dead. It becomes hard as a rock, is compacted. So we knew for certain sports, rugby, soccer, lacrosse, we had to cricket. I can look in the air and see one line and say, that's a cricket pitch, just from looking in the air. Same thing with soccer. It compacts the soil, you need time for it to replenish. Though if you do natural turf, you gotta take it offline, let it breathe, and have amazing maintenance, which is hard to do. So for the soccer fields, we go with synthetic turf. For baseball, softball, and in some cases football, so we make a decision. Plus, because it's New York City, it can't be near a floodplain, because that carpet will just float. So we had standards about where we can put it, but we're very careful whether it's synthetic or whether it's natural. But those heavy sports just destroy the natural turf, and now it becomes a dust bowl. Yes, you had another question.
The records on basketball court. I know this past summer there was a national TBT basketball tournament there. Did that come in there? Did that bring more revenue and more like interest into and what?
About Rucker, the tournaments they have is to bring more revenue. Yeah, for the producers. We just get a permit fee. That's about it. And if it's too intense, then they'll have to pay extra security for the police to monitor it. Other than that, we go through the permit process. When they tell us the extent of the tournament, then we determine if this is a permitted event or a special event which warrants more public safety support. Okay.
So I have a question for you.
Yes.
Can you describe why our students, especially those interested in recreation, but need to take an interdisciplinary approach?
I agree. A lot of what we do is intersection, public health, planning, parks, the environment, extreme weather events. You have to be knowledgeable about all of this. Case in point, as Professor West said, in New York City, after Superstorm Sandy, 392 of our park sites were destroyed, flooded. And so we came up with a new standard near a floodplain: what gets built, what doesn't get built, what kind of plant material are salt tolerant, which ones are not. We had to understand a very different role about where we place our parks and what you could put in them to protect them for the future. And so that to me is critically important. Understanding planning and demographics when you do an analysis, who lives in the neighborhood. I'm not going to put a soccer field in a neighborhood that has mostly senior citizens with no kids. Pickleball maybe, and so we look very carefully at the demographics to find out exactly what needs to be planned. One of the biggest issues we were dealing with in New York City is when football fields were being transitioned to soccer fields. Some of the folks around like saying at that time, we don't like soccer, we don't like who's playing soccer, so they literally planted trees in the football field to stop people from playing soccer. I made sure they were taken out. So you need to be aware of your demographics and those issues of what happens. So that's planning, the environment. You need to be, public health is critical. Like I said, the work that you do will be saving not just the physical health, mental health of a lot of people. And understand your role. As a planner, my role is to protect the public health, safety, and welfare. That is my badge of honor, my ethical responsibility, and I take that seriously, so you need to understand that as well. So you need to converse with others, engineers, and learn as much as you can, because the work that you're doing, sport is not just an activity, sport is something quite deeper. Mental health, physical health, connecting, bonding, saving someone's life. And so I hope you do embrace that as you continue with your emerging career. Now in school, but hopefully out there on a real job.
So as far as closing comments, I hope you take advantage of what Mr. Silver said in terms of mental health. Get outside, go for a walk, go for a run. Take care of yourself in that way. And then if you have questions and you'd like to come up afterwards, then do that. The other thing I'd say is that Mr. Silver mentioned, he said, everyone's dressed up so nice. I'm not used to that. So thank you.
But I have something else to say. Y'all are really serious. I mean, I should get up and do some kind of exercise. I'm looking at the audience, not one laugh. Everyone's just like this. You got to loosen up. You're in parks. Department of Fun, Health, and Happy. I got to find out where you'll party. I'm hang out with you. Maybe a different side of you somewhere else, but y'all are so
Yeah, you should show
relaxed.
up pre-tailgate.
Yes. What's your sports team name?
The Dukes.
The Dukes. All right. And there's a game this week, and I saw that driving in. Who are they playing? Georgia State? And what are their chances? JMU is going to... All right, okay. All right, everyone. Lighten up. Enjoy yourselves.